Charlie slumped in the kitchen chair. A single bare bulb dropped yellow light on white formica. His baby daughter, Charlotte, was finally asleep in the portable playpen, sprawled among a few favorite toys. It was how he kept her contained, kept her safe, though that word had a new definition every time he turned around. At mealtimes, Charlie held her in his lap because the safe house had no high chair. He spent what must have been hours trying to get any food into her mouth. This evening she had managed 3 bites of macaroni, and Charlie considered that an achievement. She missed her mother, of course, but there was the heat, too. No high chair and no air conditioner either. But Ruiz had assured him it wasn't connected to the FBI, or even the U.S. Marshals, so it was completely unofficial and therefore untraceable. What she didn't say was that it was also, probably, completely pointless. But you did what you had to for your kid. Charlotte Suzanne Bailey, Lottie to her friends, and Mommy and Daddy, turned onto her back and blew spit bubbles. They'd named her after Sheila's grandmother. Charlotte might have been altered into a feminine version of his own name, but Charlie told Sheila, declaiming in a voice from the Old West, that the house had room enough for only one Charlie, the one with the beard. But the family had room now. A new vacancy. He tried to put a lid on those thoughts, but they oozed around the edges, then crusted over like corrosion on a loose car battery. He could hear Sheila now. She'd accuse him of being gloomy. He would tell her she had a lot of room to talk. But he couldn't. Not now. She wasn't there. She'd been taken away, and by the very woman who had called herself their protector. Charlie wasn't a drinking man, but if there had been a liquor cabinet in the rundown safe house, he might have learned pretty quick. Mixology was almost a foreign language, but he figured Jack Daniels was in a lot of phrase books. The windows were open, and the screen door fought a desperate battle with the night bugs, who pummeled the plastic mesh with their little bodies. Through the winged cloud, Charlie could see the faint outline of an armed guard, one of 3. Another hid at the foot of the middle staircase, and a third hid somewhere else on the grounds, probably on the roof. This operation might have been pointless, but it was fully staffed. Pointless, he asked himself. How so? Because, he answered, the villains already have what they want, Charlie. Don't you think they could have taken you and Lottie along with minimal fuss? Though if anyone had laid a hand on their baby, Charlie almost expected Sheila to unload on them with some righteous kung fu she got in the same event that gave Scott his bonus skill sets. But if her almost total lack of automotive knowledge was any sign, she hadn't gotten any more out of that experience than, well, an infant. It was dark outside the pale, sick glow of the kitchen bulb. Charlie tried not to dwell on anything that might be lurking outside that yellowish circle, but his eyes kept sliding back to the door, looking for furtive movement. Any movement. But the guard just stood out there like a mannequin from J.C. Penney, and out of season black. He stood quietly to avoid making the chair squeak and wake Lottie from her hard-won shut-eye, and went to the oscillating fan. He gave it a nudge to bring some more of the muggy D.C. evening in through the window. Even covered in sweat, Lottie slept the peaceful slumber of overworked toddlers. But Charlie would be a long time getting that comfortable. Like an errant compass needle, his eyes went to the door again. He didn't want to look. He really didn't. But it was the only door, and something in him said he ought to keep it in sight at all times. That and the only visible guard. Except the guard was no longer visible. His heart gave a sudden lurch and seemed to force his eyes toward the playpen, the paranoid instinct of a man with very little left to lose. But his paranoia came a little late. Someone had walked in, completely silent, and now stood over the playpen. Barbara looked up from the sweetly slumbering baby, right at him. "Hi, Charlie." "How did you get in?" Charlie asked. "That guard hasn't left his post since I met him. And where's Scott?" Barbara, who hadn't even bothered to wear black, ignored the question. "I'm sorry we haven't been in touch." "It only happened, 36 hours ago? I can't believe you're already here. Weren't you out in Seattle or something?" Barbara eyed him warily. "Why Seattle?" He shrugged. Just a hunch. If you were on the run, I doubted you'd stay in one place. What better use to make of your travel than to go visit your," he made air quotes, "founding fathers? Kevin Adams lived in Seattle, or did when he participated." She looked partly relieved. "No, not Seattle, though we did make contact with Adams." "Where's Scott?" He dodged my question. She put a hand to her brow and squeezed her temples. "I thought it better he not come." His mouth fell open. "Why not?" "Because both of you are all raw nerves. You shouldn't be in the same room right now. You know, it is customary for people sharing a loss to commiserate with each other." "And that's why I kept him away," she said. "You two do no one any good if you go into this thinking Sheila is lost. She's been taken. There is a fundamental difference." Charlie sat down hard. "That's easy for you to say. You don't have a horse in this race." Then he put his face in his hands and propped the whole world on his elbows. "I'm sorry that wasn't nice." Barbara cleared her throat. "Don't worry about it. You and Scott and Lottie have had a lot to deal with. I wasn't disregarding the severity of the situation. I was trying to give you some hope, however clinical I might have sounded." She reached across the table and patted his arm. "We'll get her back." His sigh shook its way out. "I don't know why, but for just a moment I was completely reassured. I can see you, hunched over a computer screen in a dark room, going over plans, handing out spy equipment, synchronizing watches." He lifted his face from his hands. "Then I remembered you're a kid and that you want to try cleaning up after the FBI." Barbara tisked. "I wouldn't say that." Charlie laid both hands on the table. "I would." "So would I." Both of them turned to see a silhouette in the open front door, the shape of a woman in a business suit. The hair might have been disheveled. Charlie thought it fitting. "Hello, Agent Ruiz," Barbara said. "Chance meeting, or did someone see me come in?" "Oh, you were plenty stealthy," the woman said, stepping into the meager light. "No one saw you, even though I told them to be on the lookout." "For me specifically?" Ruiz nodded. She looked at the table and visibly counted the chairs. 2, and both occupied, before leaning against the counter. "I was pretty sure you'd show up." "Me?" Barbara asked. "Not Scott?" Ruiz was in the dark, literally. Charlie couldn't see her expression, but he sensed grim humor in the shadows. "Scott would have shown up at the checkpoint and signed the logbook. Probably would have called ahead, too. You avoid confrontation." Barbara scoffed. "No, I don't." "Sure you do. You work behind the scenes, building framework, maneuvering until you're just the right place to flip a switch and watch everything fall like dominoes. You play chess. Scott plays Angry Birds." "Okay," Barbara said. "I guess that's fair." "How is Scott doing?" Charlie asked. He felt rude for interrupting, but damn it, he was being ignored. Barbara scratched her head. "I'd like to say about like you'd expect, but Scott is a complicated guy. He's both buried in worry and remarkably focused, trying to suss out who they are and where they took Sheila." "Based on what?" Charlie scooted his chair back, making a hideous noise in the 50-year-old vinyl. "They took her and went. Didn't even care if I called the FBI. Told me to go ahead, give him the screw you message." Barbara looked at Ruiz. "I didn't hear about that." "You weren't meant to," Ruiz said. "I applaud Scott's tenacity, but surely he doesn't believe he can pull information like that out of the air. We've had our people, good people, working on it since Charlie called. They haven't found anything yet. And Scott might be talented, but he's hardly the dispassionate freelancer with preternatural instincts they always depict in movies." "He's got a contact and a one-track mind," Barbara said. "Enough to keep him occupied for a couple of hours while I made this visit." "Why did you visit?" Charlie asked. Barbara's lips formed a straight line. "Because Scott couldn't, and I thought you needed somebody." Charlie's jaw loosened, and he gaped at her. "He doesn't know you came." She checked her watch. "He probably does now." "Where are you staying?" Ruiz asked. Barbara turned to her. "Not in one spot, that's for sure. Farley drove us back from Illinois, but I sent him home to Boston. As much as I like having the extra pair of hands or set of wheels, Scott and I didn't want to involve him further." She sighed. We have a pretty long list of people whose help we should have just turned away to keep them out of our mess. Shoot, I'm paying Jerry, but now he's got his face on a wanted poster." "Oh, man," Charlie said, sitting up. "I completely forgot. What happened with Agent Molyneux?" "Who?" Barbara asked. Ruiz briefly told her, then answered Charlie. "He's alive, barely, in a medically induced coma after emergency surgery. Weeks's bullet did its work, though. Liver damage. He'll be a long time in the hospital, with constant medical care for a good while thereafter, if he stays alive long enough." "You're taking care of him, right? This definitely happened in the line of duty." "Don't worry," Ruiz said. "He might even stay with the Bureau, but barring a miracle, he's out of field work for good." She sighed. "At least I didn't lose 2 agents yesterday." Charlie flexed his hands. "You didn't lose the other. I don't think she was yours to begin with." "Not that I discussed the Bureau's internal matters with outsiders," Ruiz said, "but I'm sure you're right. Plan was in place so long all it required was a go-ahead. The only connection we found between Weeks and the abductors was a single phone call, to a throwaway phone used exactly twice. She either destroyed all other evidence or didn't produce any." Barbara gave a deep nod, the way someone does when they have intimate knowledge of a subject. And then Charlie's heart got perhaps its zillionth jolt of adrenaline since Sheila had been taken, a sudden spasm of grief made worse by the idea that he was sitting still and not out looking for her. The calm discussion made it even worse. The resurgence of anguish must have been plain on his face. "You need to get some sleep, Mr. Bailey," Ruiz said. Barbara did one better. She stood a small pill bottle on the table before him. "Valium," she said. "Just enough to calm you down." Ruiz eyed the pill bottle, then Barbara. "They're mine," Barbara said. "I had them for my work with child services. I'm not dealing, if that's what you're worried about." "Not at all," Ruiz said. "At the moment, I'm not ashamed to say that bottle looks really attractive." "To me, too," Barbara said, "but not tonight." She pushed the bottle toward Charlie. Remembering his earlier half-hearted wish for a boozy sleep aid, he gazed at it longingly. Then he reached out and tipped it over with one finger, the way he'd seen chess players concede defeat. "The king is dead. Long live the king. Sleep well, your majesty." "I can't," he said, "not with Lottie here." "I thought not," Barbara said, "and if you were anyone else, I wouldn't have offered." "Save him for Scott," Charlie said. "If I know him, he's probably pulled out half his hair by now." "He is keeping focused," Barbara said, "but he's starting to look like Gollum." Charlie nodded. "Given time, I'm sure he could make Captain Ahab seem like a hobbyist." "You could come with us." Her eyes went wide, and her hand shot to cover the mouth from which words had already escaped. "That was uncalled for. I am so sorry." Her eyes went to the playpen where Lottie continued her sultry slumber. "You're Scott's stepfather, but it was never like that with him. Lottie's already a toddler, and I'm still not used to you being a daddy." Charlie put a knuckle between his teeth and dared himself to bite. "It's unbelievably tempting," he said, "but I can't leave Lottie, and I'm sure as hell not bringing her along." "No arguments here," she said. "It was just an impulsive thought, not even sure it was my own, if you get my meaning." He nodded, remembering such an overriding impulse in Scott on a couple of occasions, though never with such whimsy. Ruiz cleared her throat. "Since Mr. Bailey isn't going to ask, I will. Where is it you and Scott think you're going?" Barbara arched an eyebrow and sneered, the very height of duh. "Didn't the FBI write the book on hostage rescue?" Ruiz leaned on the table. "2 things. 1, did it not occur to you that doing so might put her life in danger?" Barbara's dry look withered further. "We'd never go in with guns blazing. No guns at all, probably." Ruiz sighed. "Well then, 2, what makes you think I'll let you?" Barbara pushed back in her chair. The dry look was gone, replaced with heat. "Because I figured you'd welcome the opportunity to let us take up some of the search while the FBI covers its ass." "That's not what's happening." "Isn't it?" Barbara's voice had risen. The windows were open, and Charlie suddenly wondered if there were any neighbors. "It's being kept quiet to prevent a public outcry which could cause irreparable harm to the case. And the FBI already has things covered. The scapegoat is already tied to the post." Barbara's eyes widened. What? I've been removed as SAC. Charlie looked at her. What does that mean exactly? Ruiz took a deep breath. An unscheduled and unfavorable performance review, sort of like impeachment. I'll remain your liaison for now, Charlie, but I'm off Sheila's case. They're bringing in someone else. I can't work with someone else, Barbara said, and more importantly, they won't work with me. That's what I was getting at, Ruiz said. Nobody besides me will let you work on this. Interfering with police business sounds cliché, but it sticks, like malodor on manure. The Bureau will drop that card on you in a hot second. Are they prepared to arrest me? Barbara asked. Ruiz nodded. If you give them sufficient cause, or if I give them a chance. Why didn't you or Scott tell me about Levermind? Ruiz asked. Barbara scoffed. Because we were doing this thing on our own. Ruiz shook her head. You should have called me right after Huxley cornered you in the bathroom. We could have taken him then, and Barbara barked a bitter laugh. Ruiz folded her arms. It's not on display right now, but I know you have a unique maturity. Rather you share one with Scott, but you're not a soldier or a cop. Confronting these people has put you in more and more danger until, Barbara cut in, until we get a phone call that Sheila, who was already under careful protection, got nabbed anyway. She stopped and put a hand over her eyes. Look, I actually agree with you, now anyway. We're just tired of that particular opinion. We were never going to get the raw data we needed if we kept running to you for help any time someone got a little threatening. You two being taken prisoner at gunpoint is more than a little threatening. Charlie's emotional strain had come in ever-changing waves since Sheila was taken, so much so, in fact, that this conversation failed to stir him like it once would have. Ruiz eyed him closely, evidently noticing his lack of shock. He shrugged. Whatever it was, they obviously got out of it. Nothing to see here. And it's not like it was a real gun, Barbara added. But to Charlie, the qualifier didn't quite ring true. Meant to be comforting words, they triggered a thought process he had been avoiding. He decided he could keep avoiding it, for a few more minutes at least. We came out on top on that one, Barbara added, and the bad guys know it. She turned to Ruiz. Has the FBI done anything about Levermind? Other than write Levermind on a manila folder in the case file? The agent asked. No. It's feasible they're connected to Huxley et al., but we have only one man's word for it. That doesn't, she said, raising a hand to forestall Barbara's objection, doesn't mean they won't feature prominently on the suspect list. Barbara nodded. Thank you. Agent Ruiz returned the nod. Then, hesitating, she seemed to decide something. One more thing before I go. I received word that you can expect a phone call this evening. Scott can, I mean. I won't disclose who it is, but I highly recommend he take the call. She patted Barbara on the arm, then nodded to Charlie before opening the screen door and disappearing into the night. Charlie waited until Ruiz's footsteps reached the concrete sidewalk below. Then he wondered if he ought to call her back. Barbara must have noticed his tension. What? She asked. Maybe it's for the best, he said. Now might not be the time to bring it up. Maybe, she said, but you waited until she was gone. He took a long breath. I don't think Pam Weeks was the only mole. Barbara did a double-take of the screen door in the darkness beyond. You don't mean... Charlie shook his head. God, no, not her. He frowned. I think maybe it was Molyneux. The agent who was shot? He nodded. Barbara's eyebrows climbed her forehead. And you didn't tell Ruiz because I might be wrong, he said. I feel bad about accusing a guy who's already fighting off a bad case of lead poisoning. Charlie, she said, Sheila was abducted, not hauled off to a belated bachelorette party. No time for compunctions like that. He bit his knuckle. Yeah, sorry. I guess I'm just fighting my upbringing. And I didn't want to, with you and Scott. He broke off, unable to finish. You didn't want to bring up that I was once on the other side. Charlie hardened his face. Yeah, that's about it. Forget it, she said. Old news. Now, why do you think this guy might be rotten? He told her. It was mostly impressions, but with one very suspicious indicator. When he stepped into view at the other safe house, Agent Molyneux had smiled at Agent Weeks, almost certainly after she had drawn her gun and was preparing to send Sheila away in a gunny sack. It had been stuck on a loop in his mind, the way Scott described the repetitive replay of his own abduction years before, by Barbara herself. He decided not to bring up that little detail, no matter how blasé she was about it. "I was just so overwrought," he said. "It only came to me afterward, when I was doing the guilt thing, moaning over what I should have done. Maybe if I could have a do-over, Sheila would still—" He choked and cleared his throat. "Sheila would be here." Charlie found Barbara's arms wrapped around him. For several moments he gave under the pressure of her embrace, weeping silently. Then he regained a bit of himself, felt his substance return. She let him go and stepped back, as if nothing had happened. "That's probably the most common feeling after something like this," she told him. "Call it survivor's guilt or whatever. The psychology isn't important. What is important is that you don't blame yourself. That woman fooled everyone, okay? Everyone." He nodded. He didn't trust himself to speak. "Now, this theory sounds plausible," she said, "but it also sounds like it could be a revised version, your brain trying to help by making up clues that weren't really there. So think carefully, and as objectively as you can." She took hold of his wrist. "But tell Agent Ruiz about it. Don't wait. It's okay to be wrong. Don't sit on it because you're worried about hurting someone's feelings." But Charlie was no longer worried about that. He would go to the hospital. When Molyneux woke up from his medically induced coma, the FBI weren't the only ones who would have questions.